Welcome to the Paradox PT podcast. I'm Leo Falzon. Today I'm speaking with Isha Sharma. Isha is a resident physiotherapist practicing at two clinics in Toronto, Umana Health, where I've had the pleasure to get to know her as a colleague, and Bodyco Health and Wellness Clinic. Isha is a rare breed in physiotherapy, which in my view is a field where most people just practice the way they were taught in school or by their last CI. Isha is somebody who has a really good understanding of first principles and who thinks outside the box and is really creative in the way that she practices. She has training in therapeutic yoga and Vipassana meditation, which I think she integrates very effectively into her treatments. And from a big picture perspective, she has an interesting take on where our current model of physio is lacking and how it might be best reformed in the future. I think this is a really valuable episode no matter who you are, if you're a new grad or a seasoned clinician or a lay person. There's probably something in here that would be interesting to you. We touch on breathing mechanics as it relates to the pelvic floor, get into the nuts and bolts on that. We touch more big picture on the impact of social media on the profession, which I think is a really important conversation. And we even touch on payment models, so how a membership model might differ and from the session by session model we're all used to, how it might be better to enhance patient outcomes. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Isha Sharma. All right, so Isha, thanks so much for making the time to chat.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here.
Do you mind just starting off by introducing yourself to our 4 to 6 listeners?
Yeah. Okay, so hi, I'm Isha. I am still a resident physiotherapist, but hopefully not for too much longer. I just moved back to Toronto. I was a graduate from the University of Toronto, went back to Calgary to work for a bit, then I'm back here again because I cannot make up my mind. And I do a little bit of everything, and I like to pride myself on having a bit of a different way to play when it comes to physio. I like to incorporate yoga, like mindfulness, and whatever else is on my mind at the time. So anyways, that's a little bit about me.
And so you mentioned yoga, and I thought that might be an interesting place to start. I know that's kind of part of your cultural background. Yeah. What was your first exposure to yoga, and how has it grown over time?
It's hard to say. I think, I literally say it's hard to say because it's something I've always had a relationship with growing up. And, as it is part of my culture, I was born a Hindu, and so, meditation, prayer was all part of, the yogic aspect of what I grew up with. And so I remember, in my teens practicing it, just not, super regularly. I'd never go into a class or anything, but I liked to do it. I did it with my parents. I would do it with the temple. And then I decided, you know what, let's kind of continue on with this. So for a while, it was, my primary form of movement. And I decided that following my undergrad, I was going to do a yoga teacher training, and I was going to go back to India to do it. And I'm born in Canada, so when I say back, I go every few years, but I decided this would be a bit of a different trip as an adult and kind of doing my own thing. So, yeah.
And what was, tell me about the trip to India. I feel like that'd be really interesting for people to
hear
about.
It's wild. India, so I have family members in New Delhi, so we landed there because it's typically where people go, and I stayed there for a little bit. And I often remark that New Delhi is probably my least favorite place on this planet.
Really?
There's a lot going on there. Yeah, it's a lot. It's overwhelming, and it's hard because, and there's a personal aspect of it too that's difficult because that's where my family is from, mm-hmm. And I often remarked it's I got a really kind of easy life out here. Even something so simple as being able to breathe good clean air, and I had to kind of deal with the fact that I'm this could have been my life, and I'm very opposed. I don't like it. And so I had to deal with a lot of personal truths there. And then we went up to a place called Rishikesh, which is in the foothills of the Himalayas. And we checked out some yoga schools there, and it was really good. It was very different. You were right by the bank of the Ganges River. You're in the foothills, so not mountains, but big rolling hills. Lots of monkeys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I stayed at an ashram for about a month and a half, and I did the yoga teacher training there. So yeah, you woke up early, went down to the little workroom area. There was only 6 of us, different teachers depending on what you were learning. I had to wash my clothes by hand. I had to eat very pure vegetarian meals, which were also delicious.
Nice.
Yeah. And then they had dogs on, I guess, the grounds because they had to chase away the monkeys, and the dogs are very cute. So yeah. It was a very pleasant time. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. So you finished up the big yoga teacher training.
Yeah.
And that was just before you went to physio school?
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah. So I took a year from my after undergrad to look into what I wanted to do more of. So I applied for physio school because that was just felt like the next right thing to do. And then in that year, I was also like, I'm going to go to India. And so when I got back, I was working for a little bit, like for my parents or doing whatever, keeping myself busy. And then I got the acceptance letter for U of T, which was great because I wanted to leave Calgary.
Yeah.
And then by like 3 months later, I was living in Toronto.
And why physio? Like, what drew you to physio?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I never grew up athletic at all. I was like one of those drama geeks. I was like, oh my gosh, I was like president of my drama club in,
Nice.
in high school.
Yeah, you're the elite level drama geek.
I don't know if I want to like be prideful of that or not, but that's who I am. So we're sticking with it.
Yeah.
And then in undergrad, a series of things happened that kind of pushed me into different directions. I was dealing with a lot of mental health issues. And so at the time, my brother was like seeing a personal trainer. And because, personal trainers make money through referrals, whatnot, he roped me into it. And I was like, oh, look, I don't need this. I'm a yogi. I don't need to like lift weights. It'll be fine. And he's like, okay, just like go through this, like, it's a classic personal trainer. Go through this test with me and show me like what you can do and where you're lacking. And I look in hindsight and I'm like, oh my gosh, rolling my eyes. It's not what you needed to do, but it was a good selling tactic. And I was like, okay, well, I definitely want to improve. I don't know what my lats are and I want to be able to feel them.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. So I got on board, and then that was the beginning of a 5-year stint of like regularly weight training. So I worked with this personal trainer on and off. Like I went to physio school, I worked out on my own, then I went back to Calgary and I hired him back on.
Really?
So I learned all about like the mechanics of squatting, like lifting, deadlifts. That took me years to get, but I feel like I'm finally at a place where I like them. And it just helped like through everything that my life went through, like all the really highs and the really lows, like exercise was always there for me. So from like a mental health standpoint, I was like, this is incredibly powerful. And also I feel better than I've ever felt in my life because I'm physically healthy and active. Mm-hmm. I think at that point in my life, I could actually do a pull-up, but I can't anymore. I've gained a bit of weight, so it's fine.
It's interesting. Like there's so many yogis that are just yogis and then so many, strength training people that are just powerlifters.
Yeah.
But it's cool to be able to do a little bit of both and have like one foot on each side of the fence. And
I realized that if yoga was supposed to be my form of fitness, and now I decided I needed a certain level of like athleticism and like ability to do things in my life, yoga couldn't cut it because it became more of a spiritual practice for me. And there was so much more than just like the asana practice. So it was like I needed something that I could be like go hard, like compete with myself, like challenge myself. And yoga wasn't supposed to be that way. Yoga was supposed to be the thing that like held me when things were difficult. And like I believed in that so much, but I believed in both of them that I wanted to bring that to my practice of physio because I just felt like physical therapy could be transcended beyond just the physical body. I think it needed to be so much more than just, you have a sprained ligament, let's fix it. As we know, like things aren't so black and white. They transcend different experiences.
Yeah. And I think you're probably one of the only, I don't think I've met another physio who so explicitly incorporates a practice like yoga into, clinical treatments.
I know that there are people who do that.
Yeah.
I know there's a whole field of people who are like physio yogis, and that's kind of like my little Instagram handle thing. I think I'm going to change it. Who knows? But anyways, it's like this idea that yoga actually fits so well, not in just like physical therapy, but also like pelvic physiotherapy, which I also do. Yeah. It's just this like aspect of like bringing your awareness back to yourself and understanding what's going on in your body. And so because it's such a small community of people who are doing that, I was able to seek out the right mentors to help me, which was awesome because it's a small community, you're like, you have the right people in your pocket, and they're the ones telling you like, oh, you've got an idea, you've got a good thing, keep going.
Yeah.
And because of that, like following my university, I guess, career, I was like lucky enough to get like a bit of a fellowship, like a good amount of money to help me progress on that road. So I'm like working through medical therapeutic yoga, which is just so much information, but a lot of it I can take and like put it next to physiotherapy and have a framework to help. This is how I'm going to do physio from a yoga perspective.
Yeah.
Which is really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you said that like a lot of the yoga philosophy that you do is very spiritually informed.
Yeah.
is it hard to fully extricate it from that and make it kind of this, like, kind of morph it into this biomedical insurance model of physio?
It is.
Like,
At first, it was extraordinarily difficult because I was really fighting my own biases about, like, it has to be this way, or it has to be this way. Like, one way it's like spiritual, one way it's like grounded in science and physical. And then eventually I was just like, that's not actually what people need. People need like authentic like abilities to be with themselves. So if they're only at like a certain level of like spirituality, you're never going to push that, nor would I want to. But there's like an element of like, oh, like how is this affecting like my family life when I can't go for walks when everyone else is going for these evening walks? Like, it frustrates me. It's amazing if you probe hard enough to see like what is the real reason people are coming to physio. I want to be independent again. I don't want to like age like my parents. Like all of these things, which I think are grounded in like deeply philosophical things. And the yoga philosophy is a lot of that. But more so, it's just like, can we get to understand more about a person? Like really see them as a whole person, rather than just like the biomedical aspect of things, which, you know, rubs up a little bit against like the insurance models, but I just don't care. I think that there's enough to justify it in my notes that I feel comfortable with it.
Yeah, we're definitely at this weird like point in the physiotherapy profession where I don't know, for decades and decades it was just this biomedical find dysfunctions, treat dysfunctions, fix the person approach. And now, like, when we went through school, the biopsychosocial approach was definitely hammered into us. Yeah. But there's a lot to it. Like the BPS model basically says, just everything matters a lot. Yeah. And, you know, understanding the psychological and social determinants of health is really critical. But then it's like, what do you do with that? Yes. And how do you actually integrate that? That was a point you made a few weeks ago that I thought was really interesting.
Thank you for remembering that. Yeah. I say things and then I forget them immediately.
I just bookmark these in my brain.
Yeah, no, actually, I remember thinking that like very distinctly, like, school did such a good job. And actually, it's interesting because you and I had different curriculums. Like, we're a year apart from school, but our curriculum was just kind of like piloted, and they're starting to get more of this like social science framework underneath it, which I think is extraordinarily helpful, but a lot of people don't get it. And if we're going into physio and then we're coming out into like the workforce and no one else has seen that before, it makes you like, it feels very, very uncomfortable. You're like, am I doing this right? Is this like the right way to do it? But you know what? Those people are also taking many courses to understand, oh, this is actually really important. We do need to integrate the BPS model. How do we do it? And I think yoga does a really fantastic job of doing that. At least from a psychological, emotional, mental health perspective. I think there's a lot that we still need to do from a social science perspective. And so, in terms of like integrating that into our practice in a way that still makes you feel like you're within your scope of practice, it's difficult because it feels like all you can do is like screen. If you've got like, oh, this person probably looks depressed, they should go talk to somebody. But you tell them that, they're going to be like, yeah, I am. But it's still like, it's still not enough. So it's almost like you need to know all of the skills of how to talk to somebody without it being like, I'm going to be your therapist, or I'm going to figure out like your housing situation, you know, because you can't. Yeah. It's just a matter of like boundaries too. Like, it's really inappropriate. You're not the right person to do that, but you can listen. Yeah. And that goes a long way.
It does go a long way. It's really hard to know where our role is as physios, and it's like really hard to draw boundaries around, you know, this is what a psychotherapist can do, this is what a physiotherapist can do, this is what a personal trainer can do, and there's so much overlap. And like a lot of my sessions, like I had a session last week with somebody that just looked like talking about their sleep hygiene, and it's like, that's not really something that we learned a lot about in school. That's like completely stuff that is just outside of, you know, but we definitely learned that it was important. But how to have those conversations effectively, how to get people on board with behavior change, how to coach people through that, like that's a real skill that would be cool to, it'd be cool to see more of like a formalized track of like educating people on these psychosocial factors that we know are important, but sometimes we're just like, yeah, they matter, but what do we do with that?
It's really hard. Like in my medical therapeutic yoga thing, we do cover ways of like motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral therapy, and positive psychology. And it's so hard. It's like you get the theory of it, but how the heck are you supposed to translate that into a person who's in front of you? It needs to be very fluid, and you also kind of need to be okay with making mistakes, which is really hard because like you're the health professional, you don't want to say the wrong thing. So
Yeah, and then people's expectations too. It's like, you're my
Yeah.
physio. Like, are you not going to just massage me? Like, we're talking about my sleep. Like, what?
Yeah.
There's just so much education there that sometimes people aren't really ready for that, and they feel like you're overstepping your bounds, or
It's tough. And
Yeah.
it does feel like that. You kind of need to test the water. It's like, how do they respond when I say this one thing? And some people will get it. They're like, they're ready to go on that path with you. And some people aren't. And I think I remember distinctly, this was a Greg Lehman's course when I was there in person. And he was saying that, this person came to see him after having chronic pain for a long time and has tried all of these other therapies. And he's like, the last person that they saw was the right person. They were seeing a chiro. He did all of the right things. He said all the right things, and she still wasn't ready to believe him until she saw me. And all I did was the exact same thing that her previous practitioner did. But for some reason at that time, she was ready to hear it.
Yeah.
So there's something really powerful about being like, taking a step back and being like, this isn't my responsibility to make this change, actually. I can give you all the right things.
Yeah.
I can be with you every step of the way. But ultimately, it's your choice, and you have to be ready for it and not take that personally, which has been something I'm really working on.
Yeah, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, if somebody isn't progressing like we think,
Yeah.
it's my fault. It's like, yeah, but it really is, it's a two-way street. It's, and that's so interesting that it might not be where, you're, like, you could be doing things perfectly in theory, but it could just be where that person is in their life.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And that's okay. Like, that's a lot of the work. So this is something I think is really interesting, and I would love to see more of the physio group do that. So psychologists, or I guess psychotherapists for sure, have to do a self-compassion practice. They have to take care of themselves, or self-care practice. And physios don't have to do that. They don't even have to do it from like a physical standpoint, which is ridiculous because we are literally prescribing like physio.
Yeah.
So I think that it would be very appropriate that we double down on that, like from a healthcare perspective, that we need to take care of ourselves first.
Yeah.
And like, not even just our physical health, but our like mental, emotional health, and like reflect on that. So take, like, am I allowed to swear on this?
Yeah, sure. I think so. I think you'd be the first one to do it.
Really? I have a friend. He's a chiro at one of my clinics, and he's like, to be a good therapist, you got to deal with your own shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to deal with your shit so that you can hold space for their shit.
Yeah.
And I take that to heart. So I've made sure that I only work so long. I recently cut down my hours at one of my clinics so that I can literally go to a Muay Thai class, and I have never felt better. I was like, I need exercise right in the middle of my week, and it needs to be hard. And now I'm back with my therapist again, like going to see a psychologist, and I'm like, this is the most important work, because if I care so much about helping people, I really got to make sure I'm on the right mind space.
Yeah. I don't know that many people, like, I'm just 2 years out from school. I don't know that many people that haven't flirted with like burnout, straight up leaving the profession, drastically reducing their hours. Like, it just seems like something with the way the current, at least in private practice, the way the model runs, isn't super sustainable to like mental health and getting, and it, like, the problem is that it really translates into your patient's experience, right? Like, if you're burnt out, you're no good to anybody. But
it's really true. Yeah. And it's kind of sad, because like, what's the solution? Like, pay us more? That means everything's gonna get paid more, and it's true. Like, it's really hard. I really struggle with this model, and I've only been out for like 1 year, and half of that I've been working only part-time. So it feels kind of like, I kind of feel like a fraud saying this, but I'm like, I really feel like the system's kind of broken, like from my limited experience. And I'm just not somebody who can like sit and be like, you just need more years of experience, or you need to settle and like just accept some truths. I just rather not. Like, I'd be like, why not change something if it benefits everyone involved? And I'm not the only person who's saying that. I'm seeing so, like you said, so many people who are burnt out and just kind of accepting this fate. Like, we're so young. We're still in our 20s. Like, do you want that to be the rest of your life? There's just better ways to help people. And I've really been looking and trying to find ways and outlets to do that.
Yeah. So where do you see, like, in an ideal world, where would you like to see the profession move?
I think that we need a lot more training. I think that we need to incorporate we need to have more of a teamwork model, I think. Like, this can't just, like, we talk about like interdisciplinary practice. but it is so hard to talk to someone's doctor. Like,
Yeah.
I am like, what the heck?
Yeah.
And like, or even like, oh my gosh, it would just be so, like when we work in clinics that have a naturopath or a psychotherapist on hand, I'm like, this is great. We need more. So ideally it would be like a teamwork setting. In the perfect world where time and money weren't constraints, every single person would have a wellness team. And it would just be this like you would have this ability to like come in and like everyone would talk about what's going on, just like we would do rounds in a hospital.
Yeah.
But it would be for each person and it would be to their best like interest at heart. And I think we want that. I think a lot of people want that. It's just logistically we don't have the means to do it. And I think it needs to also exist beyond just like you're coming in for a half hour or an hour. Like everything we need to do is within this time because that's how we're billing you.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of a membership model. I think a membership where you are taken care of within this month that you paid, no matter what. If you need a call, if you need an email, if you need a referral, if you need a massage, I don't care. But at least you're here and I'm taking care of you every step of the way. But wouldn't it be better if we had like a group of people doing that, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really cool model. And even
Yeah.
baking in like software that kind of allows people to track their, behavior
Yeah.
change. And we're just very entrenched in this kind of session by session. You're in for 30 minutes. I'll see you in a week. And then, maybe I send you an email or I send you, some
Yeah.
exercises or whatever it is. But it could be so much more than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely gotten to the point where I'm like, if I'm seeing somebody once a week for 30 minutes and one of those sessions is like, let's go over your exercises, but I'm going to massage your neck for most of it. I'm like, I'm making a friend out of you. That's all it is. Like, that's the most therapeutic part of this is like, we get to chat and we get to have good, like one-on-one time. I get to hear, like learn about your life. I'm just going to listen. I'm not going to give any advice. I'm not qualified to give advice about X, Y, Z, but we could talk about something like sleep hygiene if it comes up. But I think that's literally the most therapeutic part of that. It's just like, yeah, I'm massaging your neck, but in like 2 days, it's going to go back to the way it was. It's going to be the work that they do on their own. So if I can help build like this like belief in them that they can do it and excitement about like why they're doing it, if in our time of just massage or manual therapy, if you will, I think that's probably the most beneficial thing that people get out of our sessions. So why does it have to be so structured in that way? Like I'm just seeing so many holes and I'm not the only one who sees it. So why aren't we talking about it?
Yeah, 100%. It's a very strange time. Like when I think back to being in physio school and just imagining getting out and just, once I graduate, everything's going to be so easy and simple and smooth. And, people are going to come to see me and we're going to do my magic techniques. They're just going to get better and life's good. And I'm going to be compensated beautifully and I'm going to have good work-life balance. Like it's just, there's so many things that I feel like I don't want to bash the profession, but I feel like I wasn't really told beforehand. Like if you could go back and give yourself a couple pieces of advice from like while you were in school or before you went to physio school, what do you think it would be?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would be like, well, I would let my previous self know it's not going to be an easy journey, but not for the reasons that you think. Like you'll be able to get the grades and get by and like do well in all of your internships, but the real struggle is going to be you're going to go into a profession that doesn't know what it wants. And so you can either choose to go along with it and find a way to get a good paycheck and live your life, and that's fine. Or you're going to have to face a really tough battle, and you need to be aware that that's what you're entering. And I think, like, hearing that as, like, I don't know, how old was I when I got into physio school? Like 23, 24? Would have been hard, but also, like, super important. Like, let's just be honest. We're inheriting a profession that was magic hands, and this is the manual model technique, and now everyone's teaching us biopsychosocial, but those people who are teaching us are in their 50s and 60s, no offense guys, and we're gonna have to inherit that. So it's up to us to decide what we want from this, and we can't just keep going along with the ride and be like, this is what everyone before us has done, because we're the ones who got screwed with the exam, we're the ones who got screwed with COVID. So you gotta step up to the plate. It's a
profession in an identity crisis, I would say. And one of the like strange things about being a physio now is when you graduate, you typically get you come onto social media physio Instagram, and this is another thing I wanted to touch on. And you just have like so many different voices that are just spouting their opinions.
Yeah.
And it's so overwhelming and confusing. And you're trying to develop your own model, I guess, of how you want to be a physio. And it can be really unsteadying. So I was curious, like I know that you're on a bit of a social media vacation right now.
Yeah.
For a bit, which we've both taken over time.
Yeah.
I'm curious to ask you, like, what do you think the impact of having something like Instagram, where there are all these voices, has had on you professionally, personally? You could take that wherever you want to, or on the profession at large.
This is a very good question. Like, you know me so well, because I've definitely used that word. Like, there's too many voices. They're all in my head. For the record, I don't think I'm a schizophrenic. But I will also say that it has been extremely difficult. At least with myself. I've always been somebody who's like very open-minded, and I like seek for truth, and I love to learn. And so when you're on social media and there's just like an abundance of information like thrown your way, you stop thinking, is this a credible source? And you're more like, oh my gosh, I'm doing the wrong thing. And of course, if you're in a caring profession, you want to do right by the people you're working with. But if you're reading all of this and it's coming at you and you're expected to do X, Y, Z, but also here are the reasons why X, Y, Z doesn't work, and also you don't have another option, you're just going to get yourself overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. And so, so I take frequent Instagram breaks now, because it's just too much to see everything of what everyone's saying unfiltered. They can say anything they want. And even if you have something to put out there, you can refute it. We know this by Twitter. Yeah. And so it's been really hard. And I think the best thing I've been able to do is just be like, look at my own data. It sounds weird because you're not supposed to put so much emphasis on anecdotes. But if you look at your own data points and like look at the people that you've helped, and you look and see like what's the pattern here? And I'm like very understanding that this pattern's probably going to shift all over the place. Mm-hmm. It's like, how are you helping the most? You're just being a good person. It sounds so stupid, but it's true. Yeah. And like there are definitely things that you need to know. Like I think at the very baseline, you need to make sure that you can distinguish between a medical emergency and not, like something that you can't help, and this person does need to see somebody else. But after that, you're kind of just hanging out, and it sounds so silly and like hokey, but you get to choose how you want to do that with a person. And when we kind of take a step back and we're so in our heads, oh my god, we're so in our heads about our lives in Toronto. Like everyone's so like, I gotta get to work, I gotta get a house, I gotta like get married, all these things. And you forget that like all of this stuff is so esoteric now.
You get as esoteric as you want.
It's just this need for control. Like we want to have control over our lives, and we want it to mean something. And so, I don't know. Like if you look at why you do what you do, it always comes back to that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and even sometimes, like in our clinical encounters, we're so fixated on the progressions, the next goal, where we're going with the patient. Yeah. Like, I don't know. Have you ever read any Carl Rogers stuff?
No.
So he's a psychotherapist or clinical psychologist, one of like the pioneers of clinical psychology in the mid 1900s, and he talks about this idea of like unconditional positive regard as a precondition for effective psychotherapy.
Interesting.
And I think that just having that relationship where you're giving somebody a trusted source of support and feedback, and just creating like just some of the moments you have with a client, whether or not you're necessarily working towards some concrete goal. Yeah. Just like you've said so eloquently, just kind of teaching them to have a relationship with their body. Yeah. It isn't necessarily like you're gonna say in your soap note, teach client to have a relationship with their body.
I would do that. I would definitely do that.
But that's effective clinical practice, I would say.
Isn't it?
Right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is a big thing. If you want to get scientific about it, it's important that people understand interoception when it comes to chronic pain, and that gets definitely mixed up when you're dealing with chronic pain. So helping people build that relationship back with their body isn't just like emotional psycho help. No. It's actually physical. And if we're talking about pain science, and so much of what we do is pain science, like you cannot refute the fact that everything affects pain. And so you can literally talk about anything. Yeah. Right? So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place where like learn the pain science, get the pain science right, educate the people about pain science, but also know that you're a biomedicalist. Wrong, but anyways, that's what the culture tells us as physios. And so stick to your lane. We can't do that anymore. Like, you have to reconcile the fact that both of them are important, and that you need to find out what you're good at and like help a person from that standpoint. But don't, like, I don't know, as much as we all want to have magic hands and we're the ones responsible for making everyone feel better, that's not your role. Sorry. So yeah.
So having waded through all of that, what would you say, like, if you had to boil it down, are some of the like foundational like principles by which you practice? Like, if you could have like a guidebook of things you always try to integrate, like with clients, like what would you say your commandments of physio for each? That's a tough question.
Yeah, this one I actually wish I
asked my last student this on her exit interview, and she was like, oh god.
Poor student.
Yeah.
She must have been so sweating under the collar like I am now. The guiding principles. Well, so this is going to sound like something I can't quite, I'll try to put it in words.
Yeah. When
someone comes in, like, I make a little bit of small talk, I meet them for the first time, I literally try to gauge, like, what's their tone of voice? How are they with me? Are they nervous? Do they warm up when they sit down? Are they excited to talk about what they're talking about? You just, like, pick up on all these little cues, and then I just kind of, like, match them. Like, not, like, consciously, but, you know, if someone's high energy and they're, like, a total bro, and they want to talk about, like, getting better at, running, I'm up there. I'm, like, matching that energy. And if someone's, like, really excited about that, you know, their recent workout plan, but they got hurt, I want to be there for them. But if someone's, like, I've been dealing with this problem for a while, it's, like, quite embarrassing, and I get that a lot with pelvic patients. Mm-hmm. You just want to bring things back down, because it is scary, it's nervous. And so my guiding principles are, like, definitely meet people where they're at. Like, find out where they're at almost immediately and match that.
That's a great one.
Yeah. And then also, like, don't be afraid. And also education. I think education's a big piece. That's just kind of, like, where my strengths are, as I love to talk, if this hasn't been evident already. And so, like, finding ways that you can integrate educational pieces that are relevant to them. This is something I'm trying to figure out. How much do you give, and, like, how much, like when do you give it, and how much, versus, like, slowly giving a little bit of information week by week.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always humbling when you ask somebody, what was your takeaway from today? And they're like, they say something that completely, like, you didn't even know you said.
Yeah.
And you're like, you thought you did this beautiful job educating them about, like, hurt versus harm or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're like, what?
Yeah. It's tough. And that's, oh my gosh, that's why I'm like, if you had, like, you spent all this time afterwards sending them emails and getting all this information because you know they're not going to remember half of what you said. And you're like, wouldn't it be easier if there was, like, a way that they could log on to, like, a pre-made app that you had or whatever that had all the information, and they could find out things for themselves. Yeah. You know, like, we just got to get better at this, guys. Our sessions can't just exist within 30-minute, 45-minute sessions. So, yeah, that's an aside. Another thing I think would also be, like, exercises they would actually do at home. Like, it could be, like, I understand people don't want to exercise. I'm that person. If you gave me, like, do 3 sets of 10 reps of this every day, I won't do it. I know I won't. But if I were to, like, if someone were to be like, do 5 sit-to-stands every time you get up from the dinner table, I'd probably do that. Yeah. So finding ways that, like, match people's personalities to get them to exercise that way. I think I'm decently good at that.
What would you say? I mean, because that's a real practical point for a lot of physios. Yeah. You come out of school, you're like, okay, just give people these exercises on Physiotech or email, whatever. Yeah. What strategies have you found to make that more effective and, you know, to get them to actually do them? Talk me through that.
Oh, yeah. I think I'm very lucky because I've picked places. This is like, I was very picky when I was looking at places I wanted to work, where I was like, I need to get people who are really actually interested in their health, because I know where my strengths lie, and I'm not good at convincing people to actually give a shit about their health. Like, please have a little bit of that before you see me, just like a little bit. I can run so far with you in that direction, but to convince you that you need to at least go for a walk, I'm like, oh man. So that is like, I like to know where their baseline is, and then I definitely love to tell them as a a woman who likes to like exercise and get strong, then I'm like, look, you're gonna feel so badass when you do this. Like, I promise you, by the time you're done with me, you're gonna be able to do 10 push-ups. That's my promise to you.
Nice.
And I show them like how they're able to like push themselves to get to, even if they're just like really sloppy and ugly push-ups, like, but they can do it. They're like, oh, I could do more than I thought I could. And when they can see that they are like limiting themselves before they even try it, I think that builds a little bit of momentum.
Yeah.
Then you have people who are just already excited to exercise. Basically, I want to make sure that that I can see them exercise. They can see themselves exercise before they leave the clinic.
Yeah.
So that they can prove to themselves that they can do it at home. And I don't say I overprescribe, but I'll say, do this every day. Not expecting them to do it every day. Like, I wouldn't do it every day, but I want them to try. And so they'll earnestly come back to me and they'll be like, oh, I only did it 4 times this week. And I'm like, great job. You did it.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, this was a trick. And I'm like, of course it was. Shoot high, knowing that you'll aim somewhere on the...
It's so interesting thinking, because, I mean, I don't, like, as physios, we don't often have a lot of our own healthcare encounters, like, as patients all the time. And you forget how anxiety-inducing it can be to, show up to, like, somebody that you view as an authority figure, or, like, a healthcure provider, whatever. There's this power imbalance. And to say, like, I didn't hold up my end of the bargain. Yeah. When we're like, no, literally, like, it's all good. Like,
You're okay.
Like, 3 out of 5 is awesome.
Yeah.
But it's just, I don't know, finding a way to, like, impart on the person that there's a minimum effective dose, and it doesn't need to be perfect. Yeah. And, perfect is the enemy of good.
Yeah.
We just need progress as
Yep.
opposed to perfection. So I was curious to, like, for somebody who doesn't understand, we've talked a lot abstractly about how yoga could be integrated into physio, but what does that actually look like? Do you throw a yoga mat down in the room? Like, tell me about, like, to somebody who really has no clue, like, what even physio is, or,
Yeah, so I have a bit of a sporadic, like, take on this. Like, I've tried doing, like, yoga-based physio as, like, a separate thing that people can... take, and it's definitely still physio. We still do a subjective assessment. We still do an objective assessment from the point of view of yoga moves even, and like breathing, which is super cool, but it's still physio. So part of me is just like, is it really worth like making a separate thing when we're still doing like something that's very like wellness driven and still like goal oriented? So it depends on the person. So sometimes like I will do a guided meditation for somebody at the end of the session, because a lot of my principles are based off of like how the nervous system responds to different things that we do. Like that's how strength training works even, but like if someone has a lot of pain, I'll be like, okay, let's like try doing a body scan, and I'll like do a guided meditation for them. I love doing them. That's why I do them. But also like, I think patients really enjoy them when they realize, oh, like when I relax, actually my pain does diminish. And so it's really interesting. Sometimes I'll like do this very simple stuff that all physios already do. Like, hey, let's do a cat-cow or a cat-camel, depending on. And then I'll talk them through like how to do it with breath. And then sometimes I'm like on a roll and I just want to like create a flow for them. So I'm like, here are the pieces that I know you need to work on. Why don't we create a flow that you can do every morning rather than do 5 sets of this, 6 reps, blah, blah, blah. It's like, do this flow like 3 times, get into your breath, get into your body, and make it like a little routine in the morning. Yeah. That works for some people. That doesn't work for everyone. So that's a big piece.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It brought me back a little bit to the home exercise thing. One of the things that my buddy Adrian said, which stuck with me a while ago, was that he tries to really make it very concrete, like where and when they're going to do their exercises. So like for somebody who say needs to work on shoulder flexion, it's like you get in the shower while you're there, like you're just going to do a few wall slides, just 5, because that's something you do every day. Yeah. And so you can kind of attach the habit to a habit that already exists. Yep. And then you don't have as much resistance to, which I found really cool. I don't know. It's a real challenge, like getting people to engage in their care, and I thought that was very smart.
I think, no, that is a very smart idea, and it actually jogged my memory. I think something that physios should focus on, like it should be a part of our curriculum, is learning to help people with their habits. Yeah. Like I'm going to probably reread Atomic Habits by James Adam? Clear.
Yeah, James Clear, I think.
James Clear, I think you're right. And because he has some really good practical advice that I've used for myself, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I have patients who I know their goal is, I want to be able to form a habit so I could do this on my own. Duh, like we want to have people to do things on their own. We don't want them to keep seeing us as much as we'd love to for the rest of their lives. So how do we do that? We don't just tell them to do these exercises for the rest of their lives. No one's going to do that. Yeah. They're going to get bored. So how do they come into knowing like what helps and like how do they get like interested in like learning more, you know?
What principles of habit change would you say have kind of like resonated most with
So
you?
just like what you said about your friend Adrian, habit stacking is the easiest thing to do. So something that people already do, they need to keep doing alongside this new habit. And then making it easy. You got to make things so easy so that they don't even have to think about it. So that's when I would say that you actually do want to invest in having a physio that you see regularly so that when you don't see them anymore, you have this already ingrained. And so I think it takes about like, I know they say like 3 weeks to form a habit. I actually think it takes more like 6 weeks. Like you need to like not think about it. You need to have it like an itch in your body that if you don't do it, it'll feel wrong. So when I have a patient actually right now who that's her goal, she wants to have like healthy habits, like healthy movement patterns, but she just doesn't feel motivated to do them on her own at home. So I'm like, great, just keep seeing me. Like twice a week, keep seeing me for 30 minutes. Like we'll just keep exercising. That's all we'll do. We'll have benchmarks. You'll be able to show that you're getting better. Like I promise you'll know that you're getting better. And then there's going to be a day where you're like, wow, I missed physio and I actually feel like I need an itch to move in my body. And that's when you know you have the habit. So building that pattern is, it's tough, but you just need to keep doing it and I think that's when having a coach or a physio is like the most important thing. You need someone to stay accountable to.
Yeah, and that's one of the real powerful justifications for actually seeing somebody for a good amount of time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about, getting somebody self-managing as soon as possible and, trying to, get people off your caseload, so to speak, and make people independent. But sometimes, like, if you see somebody for 8, 10, 15 sessions and it's, it keeps them accountable.
Yeah.
Like, they might actually sustain movement habits for months or years to come, whereas if you kind of just said, oh, you're good, like here's a pamphlet or here's just keep it up, like life gets in the way, right? So
I'm sure there must be research on this. Like it seems so intuitive, maybe not in like the physio world, but like maybe in the social sciences in terms of habits. Well, I mean, if you think about yourself, I think about myself. I've paid so much money to coaches, like an insane amount, and I think that they're the most valuable investment I've ever made. Like, not to diss physio school, but everything I've ever learned about exercise has come from my 5 years of paying a personal trainer. And I can teach people how to do a proper squat and a deadlift, not because of physio school, but because of my personal trainer. The physio school helped because now I know good anatomy. And so I can justify, I'm like, oh, this is the reason you can't do this. And like, don't push it. You don't want to hurt yourself. But like, I don't know, like that body awareness stuff. And that's why it comes back to like, you need a self-practice. If you're going to be good with somebody, you need to know your shit.
Yeah. Coaches need coaches. Like I think it's so important to just keep, and it's also so interesting. Like you recently forced Laura and I to get into Muay Thai.
Yes.
And it's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is the utility in kind of cultivating a beginner's mind.
Yeah.
And finding a coach or some practice where you are like totally, you come from the outside and you just get a sense of what it's like to learn something for the first time, and it gives you empathy for your clients who are like learning a squat for the very first time, like it just seems so routine to us, and we almost kind of blast through it and just, okay, you're just gonna sit down and whatever. But for this client, it's like, whoa, like I've never learned this in a regimented way before. Like they're dialed in, they're adrenaline is high, and I don't know.
And they're nervous and they're scared and they don't want to be a fool. I get it. I appreciate that so much. I'm so glad you said that. I had a patient on Friday whom the week before we were talking about playing the guitar, and he's a very talented guitar player. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna bring a guitar in next week because I'm having some trouble with these songs. We'll do this after the session. I want to know like what your thoughts are. And he seemed so lit up by that. And like better yet, the week after when he saw me show up with my guitar, he's like, oh my God, I can't believe you actually did this. And I'm like, I'm a woman of my word. So we played guitar for a little bit, and I was like so shy and sheepish about like getting things wrong. And it was so interesting to have that reflected back at me. He's my patient. I'm the one who's like trying to hold space for him when he's not able to do things right. And I celebrate his victories, and I'm able to easily, simply, and like kindly adjust things when he's not doing them quite right. And he was doing the same thing to me. And when I said, I haven't picked up my guitar in a while, I just feel really weird about like how bad I keep getting at X, Y, and Z. He's like, but you need to keep doing those reps just like I need to keep doing my reps, you know? And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so right.
Yeah.
So that was a really beautiful learning experience. You can learn lots from your patients. That's probably my favorite thing about physio. I'm like, my patients are so interesting.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, the human element is what makes it fun
Yeah.
and special. And it's so, it's worth remembering for any new grad who feels like they're out of their depth that, like, the patient is more out. Like when they come into the clinic,
Yeah.
they're taking their time out of their day to come in to see you, and they have no clue what's happening. You just need to guide them through something that seems coherent.
Yeah.
They don't know anything. They don't like. Do you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
like some people do, of course, which gets tricky if you're treating like another physio or a physician. But the majority of lay people, you don't need to overcomplicate it.
No.
It's just the very basics can get people really good results, which is always nice to remember.
I also would say, and this is something that it wasn't even another physio who told me this, but I was like feeling so insecure about not providing value. Like I came from a world when I was back in Calgary that it was like, you needed to be able to do something like dry needling, or you needed some super cool technique so that people could actually feel justified paying you. And I felt so like, it's such a classic like new grad. You're like, I don't have enough tools. I don't have enough things to keep doing things with people. And I'm like, that's where you're wrong, because I actually think that people do pay us because we're the medical experts, and our job is to give opinions that are grounded in what we know in research, what we know in clinical experience, and that would be beneficial for that person, like curating the words to create that so that they hear you. They're paying for your opinion, and they're paying for your education. They're paying for the years that you took to develop this. Yeah. And I think that in itself is incredibly valuable. And so that took me some time to be like, oh, like even if I have an entire session where it's just education, if they come away from that and they learned something very valuable, then that was definitely worth its time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think of going to a physician, they do some tests and they tell you, look, nothing sinister.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. Maybe follow up in 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's like, oh, okay, I'm glad I went.
Right?
But we don't give ourselves the same kind of authority, even though...
Because people are like, I'm paying out of pocket. It better be worth it.
Right.
And that's pretty shitty.
On,
yeah. And it is shitty. It is shitty when someone throws a machine on. Like, you don't feel validated. You don't feel heard. You don't feel like you're getting any benefit. Maybe you do. I've definitely done things with shockwave and ultrasound with people, and they've definitely gotten benefit. Yeah. But the idea is you're building that human connection. Physiotherapists are like people. Like, we got to do that first.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're in a really unique position where we get to spend a lot of time with people.
Yeah.
Where a lot of medical professions are just like, they don't have the time. So
it's definitely a privilege. I love it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and particularly like I know our clinics are pretty good in that we do have the time to really get to know people, and it doesn't feel rushed, and like that is a privilege, because I don't know, 15-minute in and out, like it would be so hard. It's hard enough.
It's hard,
even in the 30, 45, 60-minute model.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's hard to navigate what the right balance of it is.
Yep.
Yeah. So I was curious to ask you, violent transition, about about breath work. Because I know like that's obviously a huge part of yoga.
Yeah.
And I'd love your perspective on how you integrate breath work into physio.
Right. This is my favorite. I'm so glad you asked me this. I love everything to do with breath. Like if I had to do one thing only with people, I wish I could just do like breath work, which almost made me go into cardio resp until I realized I'm afraid of hospitals. So it's a true fact. I'm afraid of everything to do with a hospital. Yeah. So breath is a magical tool. The reason I like using it and the reason why I think it's a very fascinating modality to help hone in on is because it has a unique property of being able to modulate our autonomic nervous system. By that, I mean for people who listen to this who aren't physios, it's like you're able to tap into that parasympathetic response, that fight, flight, freeze, by modulating your breath. And there aren't many ways else you can do that. I know that there's this thing called tapping that some people really like. I don't fully understand it, but I think that the tools that help you learn to take yourself from one state of being to another is like a very, very powerful tool that we need to like learn about. So breath work is like that for me. Even just taking like long, slow, deep breaths, or even like soft breaths, I would say, is a fantastic way to be like, okay, we're going to change how you're responding to this moment just by like slowing things down and helping people see that they can get there, even though they don't feel like they could theoretically in their mind, but they have to do the practice themselves. gives them an incredible opportunity of control and onus and be like, I'm okay, I'm grounded. And to be honest, like I learned this because I was somebody who would get very easily get caught up in my anxiety, right? So like it was very crucial for me to learn how to modulate my breath and how to like calm my nervous system, because it feels like my heart rate would go like 100 beats more than they should, and you feel like you're dying, and you feel like everything's wrong, and you start to spiral. Okay, let's just slow down the breath. Let's like modulate it, increase the exhales. There's a little bit of knowledge and be like, if you want something more invigorating, you increase the inhale, the time it takes to inhale. And if you want something to be more relaxing, you increase the time it takes to exhale. I also do a lot of like breath practices. They're called pranayama in yoga to help just like slow things down in a different way. Like one of them is called alternate nostril breathing. In the yogic philosophy, the idea is you're balancing the left versus right. I actually don't care. It just feels good. And I like the concept of balance. And I think people like doing something that symbolizes like balancing yourself is a very powerful thing, like a symbol. Yeah. And then, we do other kinds of things. I don't do too many invigorating breaths because I just think that people who are in pain don't really need that. But yeah, I don't know. Like I talked to them. I'm like, would you be interested in doing some breath work? And most people are down. They get it. They understand. And I also will say that breath work is vitally important for pelvic. Like it's what we're going to do. And people have like a lot of trouble with that. But you can easily describe just how the relationship between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor are like in tandem. So you need to understand how your diaphragm's working and work with your pelvic floor in tandem. Otherwise, if you get those wires crossed, you're going to have problems. That's a lot of dysfunction there.
So for somebody who isn't versed in pelvic floor physio, take me through the nuts and bolts of how the diaphragm and the pelvic floor work together. I mean, I think it'd be really interesting to dive into that.
Sure. So this is from Julie Wieb's piston analogy. So the idea is like the diaphragm and the pelvic floor work like a piston in a car where they work together. So the diaphragm has like this, like, I don't know what this is, convex, I think it's convex. And so does the pelvic floor. Like in tandem, they're both like smiley face brackets to each other. Yeah. And so when diaphragm contracts, it actually flattens and it moves the contents of the abdominals like out a little bit, is the theory. And this makes sense because there's only so much pressure. It's a closed pressure system in your abdominal like area, your trunk. So when everything moves down, so does your pelvic floor. Your pelvic floor naturally descends. So on an inhale, your pelvic floor descends. And the benefit of that is that you can use your breath to relax all of the contents of like your muscles in your belly and muscles in the pelvic floor. That can help lengthen those muscles that are sometimes often chronically tight, which can cause all sorts of dysfunction, incontinence, pain with sex, that kind of thing. So when we're doing things with people who are like having these issues and we do an assessment and I'm like noticing, oh, you have a lot of like tone in these muscles, like tightness, we're going to work on breath work. So we're going to focus on breathing in and out, and you're going to practice every time you're breathing in, you're relaxing the pelvic floor. And I would use all of the most ridiculous analogies, all of the visualization techniques, and it works, but they're always like just the most ridiculous things. And I'll talk to you about that later. And so on an exhale, what happens is, the breath is leaving the body, the lungs are kind of like shrinking, the diaphragm is going back. Exhalation's passive, right? So the diaphragm's going back, and so the pelvic floor is also going up to make room for that. That's how pressure systems work, right? They respond to that pressure change. And so when you're doing a Kegel, like a pelvic floor contraction, you want to do that on an exhale. Right. And I can't tell you how often people are like, this is so not intuitive. And then I try to explain the science and it's not helping because they're like, I don't give a shit about the science. It's not useful. And I'm like, you're just going to have to go with me here. So I use a lot of metaphors.
Do you find within like a few minutes you can usually get people to sort that out? Or does it sometimes take like weeks to...
Yes. So, they get it in the session and then they go home and they forget and they do it backwards. And they're like, it's weird. My pelvic floor exercises are making things worse. And then I'll assess them and I'm like, so how have you been breathing? And they're like, oh no, I got it backwards. I'm like, yeah, it can happen. So I try to be very explicit on my emails being like, when you inhale, you relax. And it's still sometimes tricky because it's like tapping your head and rubbing your belly at the same time. People just have that trouble of coordination. It takes time. Keep practicing it. Be kind to yourself. It'll get it there one day,
Well, I really like the piston analogy because it, like one of the things that I've seen a lot of yogis honestly do, clients that I've had, is they really just focus on the like belly breath thing. And so it's just like, how do I get my belly as forward as possible? But they're not really expanding in all directions. Like they're not letting that pelvic floor descend.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a huge light bulb moment for people when they feel like, oh, like I can actually get air into other areas that usually aren't getting any sort of expansion.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of that concept, even just for like back issues.
That's right.
You know, or like just what areas aren't getting any sort of expansion.
Yes.
Where's the breath going? And a lot of people, I mean, there's a lot of talk about there's no wrong way to breathe, you know, there's no dysfunctional breathing. But I mean, I will say if somebody's, if they have pain in an area, and they're breathing in a way where there's zero motion through, say, like that part of the rib cage.
Yeah.
And I can get them to breathe in a way that does expand that part of the rib cage, and then they feel better.
Yeah.
I'm not, giving them some narrative that's nocebo that's saying like, the way you breathe has always been wrong. And it's like sometimes you just give people a bit of a light bulb moment, and you're like, okay, here's a drill that if you're feeling off, you can integrate once in a while.
Right.
And then they're set.
Yeah.
And you don't. Yeah. So
I get that there's no wrong way to breathe. Maybe it's just been like I'm just so in the philosophy of it, and I just love breath work so much that I'm like, oh, but you can get so much out of a good breath of air.
Yeah.
Like imagine always feeling like you're a little bit suffocated because you can't catch your breath. Like how much does that go into the rest of your life? Like you feel like you don't have the right words to say how to act in the room. I don't know, like breath is everything. It's huge. And this is like my yoga philosophy. Like you do pranayama and it's like chi energy. It goes through your whole body, and the idea is pranayama helps like navigate that energy, those energy blocks and stuff like that. But I love what you were saying about like the expansion stuff. A really good thing that people can try is like if you're ever in child's pose, like try taking deep breaths and think about expanding through your back. Like no one ever thinks about that, but hello, there's science to back it out. We prone people who who can't breathe because they need like air to like posterior lobes, right? Like everything matches. It's like it's the coolest thing to go through your yoga training, and then you go through physio, and you're like, oh my god, the connections are like plentiful. There's something here, you know?
Yeah, the breath is such a fun way to get people to learn about their body in a like. And it's also such a lovely way to start a session. Yeah. You get somebody like winding down and just like tuned in, and I have so many clients who, when I get them to try to take a full exhale, it's like this very strange, short, sharp thing where they kind of on. It's like, is that it? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
And sometimes I wonder whether some of the benefits of just like aerobic exercise, even just vigorous, weight training, you get people breathing. Like that's one of the variables that's changing is
that's a good point.
The cadence of the breath. And I mean, like we're always working in multiple systems at the same time, no matter what our intervention is. So
that's a good point. We often forget that. I like that.
Yeah, but it's so fun to be able to be creative, right? Like if somebody comes with a neck pain, there might be one therapist who does soft tissue, there might be one therapist who does, scapular exercises, and there might be one person who just gets them on their back, breathing into their, expanding the posterior aspect of the rib cage, and all three might get results for different people. And I guess the beauty of it's trying to figure out in your population who's going to respond to what and when, right? That's where the art of it is.
It is an art, and that's like why you got to meet people where they're at and not take that personally. Like, so somebody who like, I find it's really interesting when I ask people if they've ever tried yoga. They're like, I've tried, but I hate it. And I'm like, okay, so don't do yoga. It's not for you. You don't have to. I'm not somebody who believes everyone's got to do the same thing. I'm like, find something that helps you connect better with yourself, that helps you slow down. If it's not yoga, who cares? Yeah. It's going for a walk, happy with that,
Yeah, just something.
Yeah.
Yeah. People are so wired these days.
You got to find the best thing. Only this.
I know.
I hate it. But also, I get it. We don't want to be wrong. People hate being wrong.
Yeah. It's definitely an uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah. I've also, like, the thing about, like, the physio yoga stuff that we were talking about earlier, like how I might integrate that into a session. The sessions where I am doing just yoga with somebody, they're so fun. So I always start and end with a meditation. Like, just getting people grounded and being here. And this sounds bad, but I never plan my yoga sessions. ever. I never do. I don't even do my classes and I plan them. It's more like, where is the next step? Like, how do I respond to this person? Like, you need to have all of your knowledge. You need to have everything at your fingertips, but then you get to pull from whatever you want, depending on how this person's responding.
Yeah.
And I get really good, like, we get really good results because it's not about you, it's about them. So you're just, like, noticing what they need.
It's like a little dance, right?
It's a dance, yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me that you don't plan to
I can't do it. It's the worst. I really try. I try to, like, my previous preceptors are always like, just like imagine, like, take the people through a plan in your brain. And I'm like, this is like climbing a really hard hill. And it's like, you have no oxygen. That's what it feels like to me. Because then you get there and you're like, oh, they didn't want to do this in the first place. And then you're like, why did I plan it? I just wasted all this energy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question, like how helpful it is to actually plan your sessions. And I think when you're starting out, it's useful to think through. I had a mentor who said, like, you should have an idea of what you might do if somebody's doing better than they were last time, an idea of what you might do if they're doing worse, an idea of where you might go if things are exactly the same.
Yeah.
But once you have kind of a framework for how you practice, you don't need to be so rigid.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can pigeonhole yourself in a way that prevents you from maybe doing the thing that's right for them on that day when, you know, you're so set on this one exercise progression that you wouldn't go down a rabbit hole that you might have if you're more flexible. So
it's tough. It really depends on the kind of person that you are, I think. Like,
yeah.
I definitely, like, I'm like, if I'm not on my sharpest, I need to, like, make sure at least I have some ideas of what I could do with somebody.
Yeah.
But on a good day, I just trust myself. I'm like, I know it's going to be fine. But you need to know where you're at that day to, like, make sure you don't screw up. Because it's not about you, right? It's about them. So, yeah.
One of the really interesting, like, something I've been thinking about a lot lately is, like, the set kind of. Like, we know with, say, therapy or even psychedelic experiences, set and setting are really important. And I think the same applies to clinical encounters. Like, the setting that you're in is obviously really important, but the set that you're in as a therapist, I feel like really impacts things.
Yeah.
Who you are, what you bring to that interaction, it's all there, right?
Yeah.
It all impacts everything. So how do you do you have any strategies, tactics that you use to bring your best self to your clinical interactions? You talked a little earlier about, not overloading yourself, but beyond that, like, what comes to mind?
This has been a very interesting thing that I've been exploring with myself because I felt so much pressure to be like this perfect therapist that could work 40 plus hours a week and see patients. And I realized that I'm not someone who's working on a computer. Like, I can't just be in my own zone and take the breaks that I need. I'm there with somebody face to face, and it's just me and them. And they are coming here and they've got issues, and it's my best responsibility to make sure that I can be there for them. And I'm not going to be like 100% all the time, but at least don't be like in the negatives. Like, I can't be in the reds and be with somebody. Like, that's not fair to them. So what I've started doing is, like, sometimes I'll put, like, little breaks into my schedule, being like, I just need a refresher. I need to, like, walk. I need to just take my brain off of things. And sometimes if, like, I know this isn't, I'm going to confess something, but I did this the other day. I had a lot of back-to-back patients. Like, just someone was able to squeeze into my schedule. So I was like, okay, I don't really have time to breathe. And I had a patient that I knew was coming for a follow-up for an ankle thing, and I didn't need to take the full 30 minutes. So I was like, I'm going to let myself be a few minutes late and eat my snack, because if I don't, it's not going to go well for him or the next person. So I'm just going to trust that I'm going to be there for myself, take care of myself, and, like, give myself that time to breathe. And then when I showed up, it was fine. It was good. I was able to do the next session fine and good with them. So yeah, this is something I've had trouble with, because you're like, this is 30 minutes. I got to fill the 30 minutes. I have to be there for the 30 minutes. And I'm not letting myself, like, be who I need to be for them. And that's why I find the membership model kind of theoretically better, because I can't predict what's most important for somebody, if they need a 45 or a 30, if they need more from me, if they need less from me.
Yeah.
I can't fill that time just because I'm supposed to fill that time. That really frustrates me. But I can give them really good value. I know that. It just doesn't exist in a temporal way. But that's not how society works, so I gotta figure my shit out.
You gotta fit into the box, Isha.
I don't want to!
Yeah, it's hard, eh? But I guess know thyself, eh?
You do. That's the most important thing. If you know yourself, you know how to make yourself work. And, like, you can figure out tips and tricks.
Yeah.
I also need, like, plus 8 hours of sleep a night. Like, that's almost non-negotiable. 8 to 9 hours of sleep has been fantastic. I try to do some meditations or something that's like meditation based. Cooking good food, making sure I have good vegetables. I'll know it when I go a week without vegetables. I just it's like that itch of like healthy habit. I'm like, I feel it. I need to just make myself a kale salad. So that's what I did yesterday. And then exercise, regular exercise. I have an Excel spreadsheet of all of my like expenses, and I have put everything in my fixed column is like, I need to at least make this amount of money because this is like the things that I need to pay for. And in my fixed column is my Muay Thai classes. Yeah. I'm like, I have to pay for these. I have to do them. I can't. It's like a grocery bill. I don't know. It's the same. Like, it's the same thing for me.
It's so brutal when you see people in the healthcare like just stop taking care of their own health.
Yeah, you're like, what the heck?
Yeah, I think it probably happens to everybody that works in like a demanding job to some degree. But
yes.
finding like figuring out how much you need to pull back while still making it work financially and still doing right by your patients and staying sane, and it's just like it's a balance, but it takes a bit of trial and error.
It is, and I would say if you're in a privileged enough position to do that, I think it's your responsibility to take care of yourself. I think if you're in survival mode, you got to do what you got to do, and there's like much respect to that. That's tough. I won't speak on that. But if you're in a privileged enough position where you've got a little bit of help, and you're in a caretaking role, like in your work, it is your like goddamn responsibility to take care of yourself, because you can't fuck up other people just because you're trying to make a buck. Like, I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, I'm with you. Mic drop moment.
Yeah, sorry. I said the bad word.
You have to, you're gonna make me evaluate the censorship rule. I've never had to go down this road, but we'll see.
I did ask.
Do you have anything else you wanna touch on, or anywhere people can? Yeah, I guess where can people find you?
Yeah, I guess for now you can find me on Instagram. I'm physioyoga.yyc because this was made in Calgary and I had no idea where I was going to end up. Will it stay that way for long? I'm not sure. Will I be on Instagram anytime soon? Probably not. But that's okay. That's where you'll find me for now.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.